official podcast of the International Space Alliance, a nonprofit proudly supported by Google for Nonprofits, dedicated to accelerating space, AI, and frontier technologies through founder-first innovation. I'm your host, Joaquin Paz, and in every episode, we explore the frameworks, the stories, and systems behind some of the boldest builders shaping humanity's future, from Earth to orbit and beyond. Today's episode is about the space between ideas and impact, and the growing ecosystem working to bridge that gap. We explore about why space startups may struggle to scale, what makes commercialization in defense and space so challenging, and how DTIs innovate to accelerate, and the bridge are helping small businesses survive the valley of death. Why public and private partnerships, for example, are also key to the newest space economy. My guest today is Drew Busbee, COO of the Disruptive Technology Index, DTI, and a California-based nonprofit partnering with SpaceWorks, the state of California, and LA County to support the growth of the near space economy. So the programs like the I2A, DTI has enabled more than $1.62 billion in government funding and $1.15 billion in private investment for early-stage companies, helping founders commercialize the technology, secure contracts, and build lasting companies in the space and dual-use sectors. Drew is a former space officer and a key architect of defense innovation efforts like SpaceWorks, SSC Front Door, and now The Bridge, a technology transition program that helps companies turn prototypes into real, scalable missions. So, Drew, thank you so much for your time today.
Dude, thanks for having me. I'm excited to hang out and talk some space, some startups, kind of everything in between.
That's exactly what we want to hear. And I know that you have worked on the ground floor and several defense innovation efforts. What problem were you originally trying to solve, and how has that evolved, for example, between DTI and I2A, and how have you seen, what patterns have you seen in the past?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of transparency. I originally, right, when I joined the military, so I joined the Air Force. I was a missileer, so I did the nuke mission for a bit. Got the opportunity to cross-train, become an acquisitions officer. A very young gun, fresh, had no idea what I was doing. I got put on a super ragtag team very early on that was called the Portfolio Architect Mission Innovation. This team is actually the foundation and the original founding members of what is now known as SpaceWorks. But originally when we stood up that team, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to go hang out with VCs and like do all this cool stuff. It was, we need to show how we as, at the time, the Air Force, but a Space Force can go faster using commercial technology, really try to innovate what we had. There were a lot of changes in the way that we do business. At the same time, there was a rework of the SBIR and STTR program into an investment vehicle for the Air Force and now Space Force. We looked at what was happening in the ecosystem, figured we could do it in space. And the original vision wasn't to go and build this organization. It was to show that we as the federal government can be great partners for high-tech venture-backed startups. And so we did that. So we organized what was called the Air Force Space Pitch Day. So from team formation to execution of that event was about 9 months. And we held this demo day, if you will, in San Francisco. Had about 1,000 people in attendance. It was at the Hilton Union Square. But the big takeaway is that we contracted, executed, and actually started paying startups on the spot for their pitch. So we obligated $47 million. Companies walked away with a $50K award, but it was more like $55K because we factored in the credit card fees. But we literally had a company pitch, walk into the next room, sign a contract with the federal government, get paid with a credit card on the spot to show, hey, we as the federal government and the federal entity can do that. Kind of ever since that part, I guess, of my journey, it's always been about how do I get new capability in the hands of my friends that still wear the uniform. How do I help startups navigate the DoD to where it's not just this like monolithic structure that's very intimidating? And how do we get actually commercial viable companies into the DoD, and then companies that are starting, working with the DoD from the onset? How do we make them so that they're sustainable in the long term, really under this lens of like dual use?
Hey, first question about that is, sometimes founders or audience doesn't know what dual use is.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would love to. First caveat is when I say dual use, a lot of times people think 50-50. It doesn't have to be 50-50. But the concept of dual use is that there is a federal, or in my particular case, a defense application of your product, good, or service. But there's also a commercial application. And it kind of ebbs and flows between, how much defense and how much commercial you are. So put it in perspective. The Roomba is my favorite story because the Roomba, for most folks that don't know, was started as a defense project. So they had cyber contracts with DARPA and the Army. They were building throwable robots to do like mine detection. Now, this is the part of the story that might just be urban legend, but supposedly they had a demo coming up and they needed to prove out that their new mapping algorithm worked. And so they put a vacuum cleaner on the front. And that's the Roomba. And so they sold off their defense line. They're just a commercial company, but that's an example of dual use. Same thing when we first started this work, myself and one of my coworkers, partners, however you want to look at it, Shauna Chen, we went down Venice Beach in full military uniform meeting with startups, which for the record, you shouldn't do that. You should not walk down Venice Beach in uniform. You might get a little bit more attention than you want. But one of the companies there, on one end, they were building like a mobile game app. Like I'm sure all of us have seen the ads on Instagram or whatever social media is like, download the app. They're building one of those apps. But then 3 feet to the right, they were using that same gaming engine to build a next generation fighter pilot trainer. And that's what dual use is. It's this underlying technology that you build towards specific use cases on the commercial side and then the federal or the Department of Defense side.
So cool. That's an example of a company, for example, that is in an accelerator. They're building technology to advance research on hibernation that is definitely used in space, but also on Earth.
Yeah.
Right? Very, very interesting. And so what is your core role today in DTI? And what do you think it makes it different from any traditional government accelerator or grant program?
Yeah. So a couple things. So on the DTI side, I'm our Chief Operations Officer, which is a nice fancy way to say that if it's not formally in someone's job jar, it is in my job jar. So I do a little bit of everything here. One, I oversee all of our programs. The big one that you mentioned, I2A, is our accelerator program that comes off the back of the SpaceWorks Phase 2 challenges. So you actually get funding from the federal government first before you actually even go through the program. I also teach what we call launchpad sessions. A little bit of a salesman here. I'd like to say that I can give you your first 6 months to a year of business development in about an hour with me, give you the steps that you need to take to get started with working with the federal government. That is something that we offer for free. In fact, it actually costs me money because I validate parking if you come to those sessions. We teach those in person and virtual. We do a bevy of collaborative events or workshops with ecosystem partners across the region, some of the university programs, state, local governments, et cetera, all around getting founders kind of their foot in the door and getting started. What's a little bit different in terms of I2A, as I mentioned, we do get companies off the back of the SpaceWorks Phase 2 challenges. So there is a challenge that is put out there. It's a specific topic, Phase 2, if folks are familiar with SBIR. The companies apply, they get awarded, and they get me and my team for 12 weeks. This accelerator is under 12 weeks because it also matches some of your StratFi eligibility windows of around 90 days. And then once you quote unquote graduate, you don't really go anywhere for us. We still continue to keep you as part of our ecosystem. We do host what we call Accelerating Horizons events. So additional speakers, additional resources, additional events that the startups in the ecosystem might need. Those companies do get access to the facility of the bridge if they need to do meetings with investors, all of those things. Now, what makes the program different in terms of the content that we deliver is that it was 100% designed with the startups that we work with in mind. This was not a think tank of a bunch of MBAs. And I'm not throwing shots here. I also have an MBA. So this wasn't a think tank of a bunch of MBAs saying, hey, this is what we think startups need. We, being a lot of the core founding team here, had a lot of work, working this intersection before. So we actually went out and talked to the startups that we worked with and asked them what they actually wanted. I'm someone who teaches customer discovery. I have to abide by customer discovery if I'm going to teach it. So I actually went out, started talking to a lot of startups and saying, hey, you've been successful in defense so far. You've got a couple SBIRs. Maybe you want to StratFi. Maybe you've gotten a Phase 3. What are some things at this stage that you wish you knew? And we took those. I think we ended up with like 150 different topics we thought startups might want. And then we took those topics, released them back to those startups that we did customer discovery and had them rack and stack. And that built
Hmm.
the curriculum. With that too,
Very interesting.
our curriculum's never set either. It's living. So if you come through Sitter, you might come through the door a couple times in terms of trying to work with the government, getting this R&D funding. So if you come through I2A more than once, you're not going to see the same curriculum. And if you do see the same topic, you're never going to see the same speaker. So we always consistently rotate this. We always put it up to date. And that's kind of the real difference. This isn't a copy and paste format of these are the 12 weeks. It's a constant evolution, constantly changing the program, seeking feedback for companies that go through. We take that very, very seriously too. So if a startup's like, hey, this speaker was bad, or I didn't like this content, or these things, we cut it, we change it, we do it live because it is for the companies.
Very, very interesting. You mentioned about a startup can get their business development in an hour with you, right?
Yep.
My question there, Drew, was about how early, what's the eligibility, or what have you seen? How early those startups should be in their prototyping phase or the product phase, so it's really meaningful to go and talk to you?
So it depends, right? Like I'm a little biased. I'll talk to anybody. And frankly, if you come to an in-person launch session, I try to reserve at least an hour after to do like open office hours just to talk to people if they have questions. So you can totally interact with me if you're in an idea stage company. I may not have a whole lot of actionable things you can do right away until you form a company. But if you have an idea stage, I'm happy to walk people through, time permitting, of course. Walk people through. In terms of getting involved in maybe some of the non-dilutive funding, probably need to be like if you're familiar with TRL concepts, probably like a 3 at the earliest, where you kind of have some things figured out. You're formed as a company. You have that early team. That's really when you want to start looking at, maybe SBIR phase 1s or an STTR. Companies that I catch on the I2A lens, once they come through the challenge series, they're typically about a TRL 5 or 6, just kind of depending. Now, financing stages can vary. That's kind of up to the entrepreneur in terms of how you're raising capital and funding your organization and things like that. But typically about then. But when you start looking at forming a business or creating an entity, you definitely should, at least very early on, understand SBIR sitter. Early stage funding opportunities, either non-dilutive through the federal government or what your local ecosystem is able to provide you as you get started. It's an alternative to venture investment, so you can kind of choose your own adventure, like those books, like when we were kids and we all would go to the end of the book and say, I don't like that ending, I want to flip back. It's your choose your own adventure, so you can start to put these kind of Lego pieces together as you start to build your company.
Drew, you mentioned TRL. A lot of people don't know what it is. I'm going to ask you, of course, what it is, but I also want to hear, without going too much into the details, if I am building a startup in space or frontier tech, how should I think about TRL and why is it important to me?
Yeah, so great question. So TRL is your technology readiness level system built by NASA, 1 through 9. 9 is basically it's a real thing. 1 is I kind of have a concept of a thing that I might want to do. And so kind of everywhere in between. So as a startup, as you're trying to navigate this, probably the biggest thing, especially with space, is if you are an on-orbit thing, for lack of a better term. So if you're on orbit, like for you to be like a TRL 7 is like you need to be in an operationally relevant environment. That's like space. And so that is a big, big decision to go to space. I don't know the exact number, but I always like to say, hey, that's a $50 million decision. Got to figure out if that works or not. And so start mapping if you need to do that thing, like if you need to be in space, start mapping that to your product roadmap and your funding. So if you're looking under the lens of SBIR and STTR, like for you to do an on-orbit demonstration, like you probably want to time a StratFi round around that because on the upper end of those StratFi awards, those are like $60 million. So you want to start to do that as well. Secondly, as you kind of decide what kind of company you are and in terms of like your lean startup methodology, like how much are you going to risk it for the biscuit? How much are you going to test? Start to figure out what your appetite is for that and kind of work backwards. You may feel like, hey, we don't have as much we want to test on the ground because we want to test it on orbit and do prototyping that way. Again, that's totally up to your decision. It's just when you want to prove that you are reliable in that operationally relevant environment, it's going to come with a significant cost. And selfishly a little bit, I would like you to use non-dilutive financing to do it via StratFi programs like that.
There's something that you're talking about, these awards
Mm-hmm.
from NASA. And okay, also as a founder myself of a startup that failed a few years ago, Drew, I hesitant to think that founders may go into this path of awards and grants, building for not products that they're really like very passionate about, but more like services that they're or problem that they're trying to solve for other people, instead of honing their craft in what is the actual product that they want to build. So, based on your experience, how do you think is that balance that a founder should have between only building for grants or actually building your core?
So I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna be two sides of the same coin. Um, so
Okay.
uh, so look, like having been in startups, having worked in startups, we're very much a startup. Cash is king. Like you need it. I get it. Like so, I'll never say, hey, don't go get that SBIR award or don't go get that funding or that grant or any of those kind of things. However, you should approach it strategically, and that whatever you establish as your North Star, I guess, pun intended on this one, you should be building towards that. There was a story I heard of a founder. He was basically building a training suite, like an online training suite.
Okay.
Great traction with the federal government. I don't know who his customer was. Let's say the Army. Great traction with the Army, executing SBIRs. Probably going towards a phase 3 or like a larger contract. At that time, they had a customer come to them and say, "Hey, we really like this training tool. We're struggling to build like our HR, like our onboarding. Do you think you could build a tool for that too?" Being a founder, needing money, they're like, "Oh yeah, I got that. Like we could do that." 6, 7, 8 months later, what that guy found is he actually was running 2 small companies as opposed to one company with a multi-like tool set. So don't be distracted by those opportunities. You may have to say no to things for you to be able to build in this environment. It's the same thing, right? If you want to work with the federal government, you do need to have, for lack of a better term, you need to understand where your capital is coming from. Like if it's international, doesn't always mean that you can't work with that venture partner on the international side, but you need to understand where that capital is coming from, and it's a trade-off, right? Same thing with chasing SBIR awards. Maybe you get funding, but maybe it doesn't apply to what you are looking for. And that also goes when you're starting to look at these opportunities that come out. If it's if it sounds like someone wrote that just for you, and you're like, wow, this is amazing, probably worth pursuing that opportunity. But if it's like a round peg in a square hole, it might not be worth you pulling one of your engineers off the line to do a proposal submission for that one, right?
Yeah, very good point. I want to close the loop on this part of the more organizational side of the podcast. You are working now in the bridge, like kind of the what is the bridge, and how is important to be, like, for example, if you are software, like the more consumer, everyone thinks, okay, San Francisco, right? How important it is to be down in LA if you are building for space?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we are in the heart of El Segundo. We're 21,000 square feet. We're a collaboration facility. So I do have folks that hot desk out of here from my federal partners. So DIU, AFWorks, SpaceWorks, of course. They are here. They have bodies here. They're working out of here. So any of our collaboration events, they're guaranteed to feature and be around there to mingle to talk to people. But it's very, very important, at least the way I say it. And selfishly, right, we do have some responsibility in California and LA. So I'm going to hype up California and LA. But it very much is the epicenter. So we're in El Segundo. The former Mayor Boyles, now I believe Council Member Boyles. I have him on the video loop that we show in the TV on the TVs where we're hyping up what we're doing. But it's the five most important square miles in Southern California. And a lot of that comes down to what this ecosystem is building out here. So, of course, in the Bay, right? You have your traditional Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
a lot of that's software, consumer tech, things like that. But down here, it's a lot of the hard tech and the deep tech. So there are investors out here. We do have Space Systems Command, which is the acquisitions field command for the entirety of the Space Force. They do
Wow.
have connections to, Space RCO, SDA, these other organizations as well. In fact, if you go down Aviation Boulevard, and you come up to the base, if you look around it, you're going to see Boeing, Northrop, Millennium all around it. You go one more block out, you're going to see SpaceX, kind of the second wave
Mm.
of these, space companies. And then if you go another block out, that's where you're going to start to see all the startups, right? And so
Mm.
this epicenter of really, really talented research and development, kind of talent, if you will, from all of the university systems that are coming here. You have all of the infrastructure of the customer being here or the various B2B opportunities that you would be looking for. And of course, it's California. You do have the capital that is looking to spend it on defense tech or space tech.
Very, very cool. Okay, Drew, now talking more about you.
Okay.
Okay.
I
What
like
have you learned? You know, and I like that you like to talk about you because I think your experience is very important. Like what do you learn in the military that now you think has made you successful in this new, let's say, role?
Oh man, that's a great question.
Hmm.
That's a tough one. Well, obviously, I think there's the fundamental things, right? I tell people to read the FAR, read the FAR, read the FAR, because if you're trying to sell to the government, you should understand how the government buys. So definitely learning those kind of things. Um,
Okay.
but there's a few things like I'll be transparent. I don't know how to say this other than I got in trouble in the military a few times. Trying to push the envelope. And so I think probably what I learned is like it's okay to make some mistakes, and you should be okay to do that. I think a lot of times people are, you shouldn't do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical, but like you
Hmm.
may mess up. I think some of those things are okay. Learning to accept some of that. I also got a pretty good, I guess, understanding of how to pitch things with no money and no budget. So a
Hmm.
lot of the programs that I built, were all I had was a slide deck. So trying to get commanders, senior officials to buy in on ideas, understanding how to do maybe some of that customer discovery or anticipate some of those, roadblocks that might pop up. Definitely a lot of
Hmm.
grit. That's the military, man. You gotta grit through sometimes. There's a lot of challenges. Physical challenges, other kinds of challenges, but kind of that grit to get through those things. And I think those are things that still serve me well. I was a
Hmm.
missile guy, right? That's a very important mission, and it kind of puts in other things into perspective. It's okay if you get a parking ticket if the missile field is still doing okay. Put it that
Yeah.
way.
Did you always like that route of going into the military and missile, or how did that,
Uh,
end up?
yeah, that's a good question. So I'm a the military and the Air Force in particular. We really like engineers. Put it that way. We really like engineers. We really
Okay.
like STEM folks. I'm not an engineer. I'm a business guy. I went to B school. That was my thing. And so I come from a long line of the military family. I knew that was probably a place that I was going to end up. But I really looked at it as an opportunity to pay for school, do a mission that was more important than myself. Frankly, have
Hmm.
a free gym membership too. That was a nice perk. That's how they got me at the table when I signed up.
Nice.
So all of those things, and then I just started saying yes to a lot of additional responsibility, or additional
Okay.
programs that I thought were a really good idea, or I thought were the right thing to do. And so that just kind of kept leading me on to the point where I ended up out here. We, stand up SpaceWorks, and then I had spent so much time trying to help startups or VCs or non-traditional vendors navigate the space. That's when I started trying to solve problems for
Mm.
them even further. That's where ideas like the front door came from. Many of the ideas that we do here were all from me working with these companies and saying, hey, there needs to be a resource or there needs to be a product, good or service to fill this gap,
Hmm.
help these folks actually grow and scale this technology that we need.
That's a good like thread to pull because if I'm a founder, I want to understand, like based on all your knowledge, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that startup founders have when they're trying to work with the government or with the SpaceWorks, for example?
So there's a couple. back to my earlier point, read the FAR, read the FAR, read the FAR. I know
What is
there's
the FAR? What is the
so the
FAR,
FAR
Drew?
is your federal acquisition regulation. It's
Okay.
essentially the rule book. It's how we buy. You may see things like OTAs, which are other transaction authorities.
Okay.
There's a push to use those more, but again, it comes down to a contracting person.
Mm,
So I think to answer your question, there's a couple things that founders maybe stumble with.
mm-hmm.
One, the DoD or the federal government is not a single entity. It's really a network of nodes of different people, different AFSEs or job codes, responsibilities, budgets, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I see, I'll meet a founder who, their first time they're like, "Hey, we're building this for the Department of Defense," and I go, "Cool. Who in the Department of Defense?" And I go, "The Air Force." I go, "Who in the Air Force?" And right, we work with that all the way down. So one, you
Okay.
really need to figure out like an individual person and develop that persona of who you are quote unquote selling to. It needs to be a person, it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a real person. It doesn't need to be a living, breathing human, but it should feel like a real person that maybe I would work with or things like that and be able to tell that story. Secondly, on that
Mm-hmm.
thread, they may get early traction and think that that is their customer forever. Not necessarily, right? I would love for you to find, your first customer, first swing at bat, home run, crushing it. You're the next Anderl, you're great. Please invite me to your yacht. All that kind of
Mm-hmm.
fun stuff. But that's not always the case. So you need to build relationships across the DoD with different organizations. You need to ask for introductions. You need to understand different funding opportunities, and then kind of go from there, right? You may have someone who signs up very, very early on to support you on some cyber work, but it just doesn't fit into
Mm-hmm.
their program long term. Secondly, with that, my dad used to say the best part of the military or the worst part was that you rotated every 2 years. So if you didn't like your boss, well, he was only there for 2 years. But if you really liked what you were doing, well, you're going to rotate in 2 years. And, if you keep those relationships warm, those people start to expand your network as well. So understand, hey, these people are doing different things. And then probably thirdly there, understand that everyone has a different responsibility or a different problem they themselves are solving. The Department of Defense, the DAF, DoD, whoever, it's not that we don't want cool tech, but it is that we
Mm-hmm.
want solutions to our problems, right? So different people have different, problems or things that they're quote unquote graded on, is what I always like to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like a PEO, you might want to interact with a PEO who runs this whole program office, but they are required to basically be satisfying their budget, protecting their budget, trying to keep their budget funded for the various programs that they're responsible for. Whereas you
Mm-hmm.
might want to interact with a user and they just might want their day to day easier of trying to fix a plane or trying to do these things. And then everyone who's involved in that buying decision, it's a little bit different. It's not like me going to the store and buying, popcorn or something like that. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand that there's a contracting officer involved. There's an FMer who runs the budget. There's a program manager involved, legal, PA, all of these different folks might be involved, and just start to understand what their different functions are and how you might be able to anticipate some of their problems.
Very, very interesting. I think very good tools for people being building here. And any last key piece of advice that you would like to give to any early stage founder preparing to enter like dual use or like government markets?
Um, so the military, particularly,
Mm-hmm.
we are the only customer that I'm ever aware of, and if anyone knows anyone else, please let me know. I am the only the DoD military only customer I know of that will pay you like for through a phase one, or these other early funding mechanisms to learn how to sell to them, to validate your idea to them. It's non-dilutive. They don't sit on your cap table. And also, if we're out and about at like an industry event and we're in uniform, we have to be the only customer that wears our resume around. So
Mm-hmm.
you can
Yeah.
navigate and understand like, oh, that's what those ranks mean, that's what that patch means, that's what that organization does, and that's easier said than done, right? But if you can do those things, you're already ahead
Mm-hmm.
of the curve, right? Understand like, hey, we want technology, we want alternatives to what we're currently fielding, we want new capability, we want it better, faster, cheaper. And fundamentally it's deterrence, it's about saving lives, it's about being able to get sorties up in the air. Those are the things that we're concerned about. Scheduling tools are great. I really needed a scheduling tool when I was a guy uh,
Okay.
in the missile field, but that might not be as compelling as like your next generation fighter or things like that. So
Yeah.
just think
Yeah.
about those things.
Drew, out of personal curiosity,
Yeah.
are you still like an active member where you can wear your uniform if you want?
Um,
Or
eh,
okay.
maybe. We'll see.
Okay.
I mean, people will wear it. It's going to be a UOD kind of thing.
No,
I have hung my uniform up, and I'm not putting it back on. I do have
no.
my patch board and my I love me wall. Um,
Cool, cool.
but
My
yeah,
father was 30 years in the military back home, and he put the uniform out after 30 years, never looked back.
nope, yep, it's in my closet. It's in my closet.
Good,
It's hanging there.
good era. Yeah,
Yep.
good era. Okay, so Drew, let's do a quick fire round of quick questions.
Yeah,
Okay, just to kind of wrap up, one startup that you have seen recently that really inspire you, or maybe a couple,
a
or
couple.
technology. Doesn't have to be one team or.
Um, Henry Kwan and the Icarus folks. They're out here in El Segundo. One of the things I really like about them is, man, he's living it. He Googled where's the best R&D talent. El Segundo popped up. He loaded up his Bronco with the prototype and drove out here and set up shop. So he's crushing it.
Okay.
Yeah, Amir Abadi over at Airway, he's doing really cool stuff. They're really going after it the right way in terms of trying to find customers, doing their go-to-market strategy. Of course, you have some juggernauts that are starting to emerge, like the
Mm,
Impulse and the K2 Space, which are
mm,
I2A companies, selfish plug. They're
okay.
crushing it as well. So all those guys are rock stars.
Very cool. Any favorite example of successful dual use technologies? Oh, well, you mentioned the Roomba. Anything
Yep.
else in your mind?
Room is a good one. There's a company that I worked with very early on for their first StratFi, which was Orbital Sidekick. So they do hyperspectral imagery, predominantly oil and gas. They have been kind of the prototype of a lot of this work over the last couple years. So they're
Oh,
crushing it. I spent some time at a company called Everactive. It's industrial
mhm.
IoT. You wouldn't think that screams military, but they work with large scale factories. And then on the defense side, they're working with Navy shipyards and things like that, and steam trap monitoring. All those kind
Mhm.
of things are pretty cool, and all those companies are crushing it too.
Drew, a book or framework that you recommend to founders?
Uh, oh man, that's the hardest question you've asked me all day. There's some good ones. Hack Your Bureaucracy is a good one. Understand
Okay,
the
good.
system and how to navigate the system. Very, very
Good.
important, especially in this
Okay.
work. 0 to 1. I think everyone's got to do
Yeah.
that. I think lean startup,
Yeah.
everyone's got to do that. Um,
Mhm.
if you were gonna go buy one right now, and you're a
Mhm.
founder, Hangry by Mike Evans. It has nothing to do with defense.
Okay.
It is about him starting Grubhub. And if you've been a founder, or you're someone like me that ends up building things because you get super frustrated around something and there's a problem, um,
Mhm.
I think it's a good, somewhat of a therapy
Man,
session, but also a good lesson on, how to build a company and what he was thinking about as he built Grubhub.
very, very interesting. I'm gonna definitely read it. Um, last question. Any your personal mission in one sentence or
Yeah.
in one paragraph?
That's a good question. My personal mission, and I had to think about this a lot when I was getting off of active duty.
Hmm.
One, it was, I want to get defense tech and emerging technology into the hands of my friends who still wear the uniform every single day, because they're out there doing the fight. And then the
Hmm.
second piece was to stamp LA firmly as the epicenter of defense tech in the United States. Like, this is the Silicon
Yeah.
Valley, if you will, of defense tech, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Drew, this is an exercise that I do. I saw it on a podcast and I really like it. Without knowing who is going to be the next guest on the podcast, what question would you like to leave to that person?
Without knowing which guest.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. You asked me what my mission is. I'm gonna ask someone what's their North Star. What?
Okay.
Why? Why did you get up today? What is it? What are you gonna accomplish?
Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you so much for your insight and clarity and commitment to helping founders succeed in one of the most complex and impactful sectors. You work at DTI. I think it's amazing, opening doors that didn't exist a few years ago. And your work with founders is great. To our listeners, if you're building something bold in space, dual use tech, or deep innovation, this episode is great for you. The future is being built, and there are people like Drew working every day to help you bring it to life. Follow the work we're doing at the International Space Alliance. I'm going to put more information down in the comments. And until next time, thank you so much.